This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Mateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. U.S. President Donald Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum take effect in a month. South Korea, one of the top U.S. suppliers, could potentially be forced to search for new export markets. Now, a dispute over potential dealings between China and the Cook Islands sparks a diplomatic row between the Pacific island nation and its traditional partner, New Zealand. Now, an armed group in Myanmar orders Chinese nationals linked to online scams to leave its border town by the end of the month after China pressures Southeast Asia to act. And concerns surfacing over potential personal data leaks to China through BYD's recently launched EVs into the South Korean market. Also in East Asia tonight, Tokyo will soon be switching to a 4-day work week for government workers to address the country's low birth rate. But is Japan's workaholic culture making this a tough sell? South Korea has vowed to protect the interests of its firms after U.S. President Donald Trump slapped 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports with no exceptions. Well, the new rates will come into effect on the 12th of March, hitting some of America's allies, including South Korea. Well, you see, Seoul is the fourth biggest seller of steel to the U.S. last year. It was the first U.S. ally to be exempted from tariffs on the metal during the first Trump administration. Well, under the 2018 deal, Seoul enjoyed a duty-free quota of about 2.63 million tons of steel exports. Well, meantime, shares in South Korean steelmakers extended losses today. POSCO Holdings closed down 0.8%, falling for a second straight day. And Dongkook Steel Mill fell 0.9% to close at a 3-month low. Right, for more on this, Lim Yoon-suk, she joins us live now from Seoul. Yoon-suk, I'm curious to know, what did the South Korean leaders say in response to this latest tariffs?
Well, the South Korean government is trying to do its best and try to cope with the situation. And I think, for a while it was hoping that South Korea would not be included, though many experts here have been saying that the measures would likely affect all countries, including South Korea. Now, the acting President Choi Sang-mok held a meeting this afternoon with the relevant ministers saying that the concerns that they had about the U.S. tariffs had now become a reality. And he said the South Korean government would be offering support measures for firms hit by this, though he didn't give details as to what kind of measures the companies would get. But he also did say that while there are rising concerns and, this time now could also be seen as an opportunity since everyone is really going to be slapped with those tariffs. And so they're really on the same page and there could be equal competition for all the exporting countries. And he also said that South Korea would be expanding communication with the United States. But right now, South Korea, we know South Korea is going through this political turmoil and it doesn't really have a presence since President Yoon Suk-yeol is currently behind bars. And right now he is on trial at the Constitutional Court. And that had been a major concern here for South Korea, especially with the U.S. President Donald Trump going into office and, with no Korean leader to call him or make any contacts with the United States. And in fact, this was something that was highlighted by the main opposition Democratic Party. So let's listen to what the party's head of the policy committee said first today.
이를 타개하고자 세계 각국은 정상 외교를 벌이고 있습니다만 우리나라는 대통령 권한대행이 전화 통화 일정조차도 잡지 못하고 있는 그런 상황입니다. 윤석열의 경제 무능과 내란 사태가 초래한 역대급 위기를 더는 방치할 수 없습니다.
Well, many experts here are saying that the Constitutional Court could reach a decision as to whether he should be reinstated or removed from office, which then means that South Korea will have to hold an election within 60 days. And so there will be this power vacuum here in South Korea, and whether it's President Yoon or a new leader takes the presidential office. But meanwhile, the acting president, Choi Sang-mok, also did say that, that the government will be working very closely with the steel companies here. And also at the meeting today, Choi Sang-mok did say that South Korea will be discussing the measures together with the other countries like Japan, the European Union, because there is still time left before that deadline that the U.S. have put for March 12th here, for March 12th.
That's right. The deadline is a month away. We do know that South Korea is a major provider of steel to the U.S. and therefore, to a certain extent, it is crucial to the American market for Seoul. So what's next?
Well, yes, I mean, the U.S. market is crucial for South Korea. You know, recently is one of the biggest suppliers to the United States, together with countries like Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. And currently, the U.S. market accounts for more than 10%, about 13% of South Korea's steel exports. And so the tariffs will have an impact on the steel companies here. But, you know, having said that, South Korean steelmakers have, in recent years, diversified its markets to other places like Southeast Asia and Europe, and so that it's not too dependent on the U.S. market. And many experts here are saying that South Korean steelmakers have a specialty because they're exporting the higher valued products compared to other countries. And so it could remain competitive in this market. Though, you know, much of what's been exported to the U.S. right now are also used by South Korean companies operating in the United States, like Samsung, LG, and also the car maker Hyundai, which has a production plant in the United States. Now, with the tariffs becoming a reality, it is very possible that we will see some of the South Korean companies and steel companies too looking to invest in the United States, since experts here are saying that those with the production facilities in the United States will probably benefit the most, especially during the U.S. President Donald Trump being in office.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing. Lim Yun-suk there, reporting to us live from Seoul. Without exceptions or exemptions, Mr. Trump may have said these words about his steel tariffs, but Australia could escape that following a phone call by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. A U.S. leader confirmed he agreed to consider an exemption, noting America's trade surplus with Australia.
I said to the President Trump that this was an issue of some media coverage in Australia, and that we therefore agreed on the words that would be used, that it was under consideration. That's what I'll stick to, but we'll continue to engage quite clearly constructively. But can I say this? It was a very constructive and warm discussion.
Roger Maynard explains why more negotiations may be needed for Australia to end its tariff woes.
President Trump's remarks over the past 24 hours have left Australia hopeful that it won't be affected by the tariffs, but with no surefire guarantee. Today's 40-minute phone call between Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Mr. Trump seemed to bode well. Describing the Prime Minister as a very fine man, Mr. Trump said he would give great consideration to Australia, but appeared reluctant to say Australia would be exempt from tariffs. In a separate live TV broadcast, he insisted it's 25% without exceptions or exemptions, and it's all countries. But when questioned, he did concede that America enjoyed a surplus with Australia and that a tariff exemption was something he would give great consideration to. Now, precisely where this leaves Australia is far from clear. What is certain is that Canberra will need all its negotiating skills to cement a deal before the tariffs come into effect on March the 4th. More fundamentally, it might raise questions about the value of AUKUS and even the Quad partnership. But on the positive side, there's already a free trade deal between the two countries, which works in America's favour, and the AUKUS agreement is already paying dividends for America. In fact, only last weekend, Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles handed over a cheque for $800 million Australian dollars to the United States as the first instalment in a multi-billion-dollar investment in the nuclear-powered subs. Mr. Trump is believed to support the AUKUS agreement, and especially the money it brings in. He wouldn't want to undermine that deal, which in theory augurs well for Australia's relations with the United States. The other encouraging note is that the last time Mr. Trump was in power, Australia's then coalition government did succeed in persuading him not to impose tariffs. We'll have to wait and see if today's Labour government has the same power of persuasion.
In other news, Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown is heading to China, his first state visit to the country. But the trip is ruffling feathers in New Zealand over a partnership deal the Pacific nation is expected to sign with Beijing. Well, the pact is expected to cover areas like infrastructure, trade and tourism. It could also include deep-sea mining, a practice some critics say could worsen climate change. Well, New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon is seeking transparency over the agreement. He declared his country is in dispute with the Cook Islands, as Wellington was not properly consulted over the plans. But Mr. Brown denied any dispute, saying that engagement has been consistent, respectful and open. The Cook Islands is a self-governing country and its residents are citizens of New Zealand, and the nation relies on Wellington for defence and financial support under a 60-year-old free association agreement. Now, China's growing influence in the Pacific has been a concern for the US and its allies. Beijing maintains that both New Zealand and the Cook Islands are important partners, but said its relationship with the latter is not targeted at any third party and should not be subject to or be disrupted by any third party. An armed group in Myanmar has set a deadline for Chinese nationals involved in online scam operations to leave the border town of Payantonzu by the end of the month. The Democratic Care and Benevolent Army, or DKBA, controls much of the town's administration and security, and it wants to prevent scam operators from settling there and has warned of harsh punishment for those who do not comply. Now, the move comes amid growing pressure from China to crack down on criminal syndicates targeting Chinese citizens in Southeast Asia. Just last week, Thailand cut off electricity, fuel and internet to several border areas where scam centers are rampant. Officials say that these operations, run by criminal gangs, have damaged Thailand's tourism industry, with Chinese visitors cancelling plans to visit the country. Well, the armed group DKBA says it aims to rebuild trust with the Thai government and regain access to critical resources. The issue came into focus after a Chinese actor was kidnapped and trafficked into a scam compound in Myanmar last month. He was rescued by Thai police, who found him in Myanmar. South Korea's suspended President Yoon Suk-yeol has blamed what he calls the malicious opposition for his decision to declare martial law. At his impeachment trial today, Mr. Yoon recalled his budget speech in Parliament when he said opposition lawmakers did not even make the hall. Now, at another address, Mr. Yoon says opposition MPs turned their heads away and refused to even shake hands. He says these gestures are deeply malicious and expose the opposition's intent to destroy his government. In his martial law declaration, Mr. Yoon labeled the opposition anti-state elements who are intent on insurrection, saying the decree was required to safeguard constitutional order. Now, as the Constitutional Court decides whether to uphold Mr. Yoon's impeachment, hundreds of his supporters gather to demand his reinstatement. The court is expected to rule on Thursday. Now, if the impeachment is upheld, fresh elections must be called within 60 days. South Korea is in shock after an 8-year-old girl was killed by a teacher in the city of Daejeon yesterday. The girl was found in her school with stab wounds to her face and neck, and the teacher beside her.
시청각실 내 장비실에 학생과 교사가 쓰러져 있는 것을 학생의 할머니가 발견하였습니다. 이후 경찰이 잠겨진 문을 열고 들어갔습니다. 17시 40분경 학생은 구급차로 병원으로 이송하였고 학생의 아버지는 해당 학교 교감의 차량으로 병원으로 이동하였습니다.
Police say the teacher has admitted to stabbing the girl. She's being treated for self-inflicted wounds before interrogations resume. Reports also say that the teacher had taken a leave of absence due to depression but returned to work prematurely in December. Breaks up next, but coming up in East Asia tonight, car sales are down in China and new energy vehicles lagging their petrol-fueled competitors. And later, property developer China Wangke getting financial help in the form of a loan. We'll tell you who's stepping up to help ease the firm's strained cash flow. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for some business updates with Henry Yin. And Henry, I believe competition is intensifying in China's auto market. And what is it we're hearing that Tesla seems to be running behind?
Well, precisely, Otelli. And you heard that right. The AI-powered advances by BYD and other Chinese automakers contrast with Tesla's inability to release its latest driver assistance software in China. I have more on this in just a bit. But first, here are the latest numbers from China's auto market, and they are less than impressive. And Chinese car sales posted the biggest drop in almost a year in January. They fell 12% on year as automakers braced for intense competition in the world's largest auto market. Passenger vehicle sales in the country land to post big swings in the first 2 months. That's due to shifting timings for the Chinese New Year, which began in January this year versus February last year. And analysts say some of this year's demand may have been front-loaded as automakers raised at the end of 2024 to meet annual sales targets. And also as buyers rushed to take advantage of government subsidies before a subsidy extension was announced last month. So sales of EVs and plug-in hybrids, collectively known as new energy vehicles, grew 10.5% on year and making up more than 41% of total sales. It's the second straight month that NEVs failed to outsell gasoline cars. For the whole of 2025, NEV sales are forecast to account for 57% of overall car sales, up from 47% last year. As the world's largest auto market is set for slower sales this year, despite extended subsidies, EV giants including BYD are competing on a price war for the third year in a row, and some other players are restructuring to tide through the competition. Dongfeng Automobile announced restructuring with another state-owned company, while Chang'an Automobile issued a similar announcement over the weekend. Well, meanwhile, Chinese electric vehicle giant BYD is gaining ground in artificial intelligence-powered driving technology over rival Tesla. BYD's progress comes as Tesla faces hurdles in releasing its new driver assistance software in China, with chief executive Elon Musk blames on regulatory issues. BYD has introduced a new system for Chinese car buyers aimed at low-price mass-market vehicles. The technology, named Eyes of God in Chinese, will be available in all models for no additional cost. This includes its cheapest model, valued at around $9,600. Vehicles with the system are able to self-park and cruise on city roads with little human intervention. BYD founder Wang Chuanfu says his company is at an advantage because so many of these vehicles instead are on the road, putting it ahead on data collection for training its AI system. And clear signs of optimism in the Chinese EV giant following its new smart driving technology announcement. BYD shares briefly jumped as much as 4.5% to an all-time high on Tuesday, before dipping as traders took profit, driving stocks beyond fair value. So far this year, BYD shares have climbed more than 20%, while Tesla's have fallen 13%. The Chinese automaker's stock price surged 17% last week alone, ahead of its AI smart driving announcement. The company finished 2024 as the 7th largest car company by sales worldwide, catching up with Tesla as the largest maker of full EVs. BYD's move far undercuts rivals, global and domestic. Analysts say it could start a new price war in an already hyper-competitive market. Shares of Chinese EV makers Xpeng and Geely Auto tanked on worries that they will struggle to compete against BYD. Well, alongside its meteoric AI advances, BYD is also being catapulted into the spotlight amid growing concerns about data privacy. South Korean industry observers are questioning the potential risk of personal data being exposed to China through BYD vehicles. The security risks were flagged after the Chinese EV manufacturer made its official entry into South Korea last month. The core issue lies in the connected car features BYD offers, such as over-the-air software updates and navigation apps, which have raised alarms about the data they might collect. Security specialists are urging the EV maker to provide a clear breakdown of the types of data it gathers and the processes it uses to handle it. In response, BYD said that data collected in South Korea is managed there and won't be shared with its headquarters in China. The recent launch of the low-cost AI tool has raised concerns over potential data leaks globally. The controversy surrounding DeepSeek has prompted South Korea to take action with a ban on the use of its services by both government agencies and private firms at work. Well, China and Hong Kong stocks declined today, snapping consecutive sessions of gains. And that's as investors' enthusiasm for AI and chip stocks cooled, while traders weighed U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariffs. And take a quick look at the numbers. Hang Seng Index down by more than 1% at the end of the trading session, while Shanghai Composite Index off by less than 0.2%. In Shenzhen, the benchmark index down by 0.7%. And zooming in on Foxconn, it's shot up by 4% in Taipei before pulling back. The Apple contract manufacturer posted a more than 3% jump in monthly revenue and forecast a stronger first quarter performance. Well, cash-strapped China Vanke is getting financial help from one of its major shareholders. State-owned Shenzhen Metro is giving it a $383 million loan to the real estate firm in a sign that the government is stepping up efforts to stabilize the property developer. Vanke, in return, will pledge more than 18% of its listed property services unit, Woes, as collateral. The loan is the first liquidity support from Shenzhen Metro. It follows a senior management reshuffle in Vanke last month that increased state oversight and intervention to contain any non-repayment risks. In a separate filing, Vanke published a repayment announcement for its 3 billion yuan notes maturing on February the 16th, signaling it will make the repayment on time. Analysts saying the Shenzhen Metro loan shows the authorities' efforts to avoid a bond default by Vanke, but they add the amount is small compared to the more than 30 billion yuan of Vanke public bonds maturing in the rest of this year. And shares of Vanke in Hong Kong closing slightly in the red, while its shares in Shenzhen closing down about 2.5%. Shares of China Vanke unit Woes are down about 1% in Hong Kong. Well, Elon Musk is attempting to buy the nonprofit that controls OpenAI, marking a new front in his war with the ChatGPT maker.
A consortium led by Elon Musk said on Monday it has offered $97.4 billion to buy the nonprofit that controls OpenAI. It's another attempt by the billionaire to block the artificial intelligence startup from transitioning to a for-profit firm. Musk's bid is likely to ramp up a long-standing feud with OpenAI CEO Sam Altman over the future of the ChatGPT maker. Altman on Monday posted on X, quote, "No thank you, but we will buy Twitter for $9.74 billion if you want." Musk co-founded OpenAI with Altman in 2015 as a nonprofit, but left before the company took off. He went on to found the competing AI startup xAI in 2023. OpenAI is now trying to transition from a nonprofit into a for-profit entity. It says that restructure is required to raise the funds needed to develop the best AI models. Musk's new offer is only his most recent attempt to throw a wrench in those plans. In August last year, Musk sued Altman and others, claiming they broke contract by putting profit ahead of the public good in the push to advance AI. Then, in November, he tried in court to block OpenAI from converting to a for-profit structure. The consortium led by Musk that is now trying to buy OpenAI's parent nonprofit includes xAI and several investment firms. Were a deal to go through, xAI could merge with OpenAI, according to the Wall Street Journal, which first reported Musk's offer earlier on Monday. Aside from any antitrust implications, a deal of this size would need Musk and his consortium to raise enormous amounts of funding. According to an uninvolved investment banker, in order to finance such a bid, Musk could sell part of his stake in Tesla or take a loan against his stake. He could also put up as collateral his stake in rocket company SpaceX, which is worth tens of billions of dollars.
And that's the latest for business. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Henry. Well, we are going to go for another break now. That's coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Can a 4-day work week take root in Japan, where long hours are often seen as dedication? We ask an expert. South Korea vows to protect the interests of its companies after U.S. President Donald Trump signs off on 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. An armed group in Myanmar issues a deadline for Chinese nationals involved in scam operations to leave amid growing pressure from China to crack down on criminal syndicates targeting its citizens. Chinese car sales posted their biggest drop in almost a year in January, tumbling 12% from a year earlier as competition intensifies in the world's largest auto market. Now, Japan's Prime Minister has called it a quiet emergency. He's referring to the country's stubbornly low birth rate and a population that's been shrinking for 15 years straight. Now, Tokyo wants to change course and is giving government workers a 4-day work week from April. But one company in Isehara, just 2 hours from the capital, has already started doing so. CNA's Money Mind takes a look.
Weekends now start a day early for 41-year-old Takafumi Kawasaki. Working a 4-day week means he can spend Fridays with his 3-year-old son.
そこだけはなんか自分が子供の成長を独り占めできているような感覚になれて、僕自身がちょっと幸せな気持ちで。
He also enjoys having a cozy meal, catching up on reading, and doing household chores.
あとこの買ったやつを集めてゴミ袋に入れるっていう作業もあるので。
His shorter work week doesn't mean fewer hours, a change to his workload, or salary. But other things have changed now that he needs to work 40 hours in 4 days in exchange for the extra day off.
思います。というのも金曜日1日稼働できないので、そこに向けて4日間で業務を終わらせるためにどうやって優先順位をつけていくかっていうのはより考えるようになったかなっていうふうに思います。あとは自分の主な仕事が書いたりすることなので、朝9時までの時間とか、あとは夜6時以降とか、そういったいわゆる週休2日制の社員がいない少ない時間帯に、いかに自分の業務に専念してどうやって集中するかっていうところがすごく大事かなというふうに思うようになりましたね。
Takafumi took up the 4-day work week scheme at Kamiya Corporation in early 2024. The 80-year-old door manufacturer in Japan's Kanagawa Prefecture also offers some staff flexible hours or remote work to reduce their commute. On days he needs to be at the office, Takafumi has an early start. His day ends at 7:30 p.m. Minus his lunch break, he's worked 10 hours instead of 8. But this is not much different from when he worked a 5-day week.
6時が定時でも8時までいることってざらにあったし、それが当たり前で6時にぴったりに帰る人なんかほとんどいないような、業界というんですかね、会社で働いていたっていうところもあるので。
Over 40% of Kamiya's employees even say their productivity has improved. For Kamiya, this translates to better earnings as sales increase, while overtime pay is cut down. It isn't just about the bottom line. Kamiya says that its flexible work schedule makes it more attractive as a prospective employer.
学生も今はもう働きやすい会社、ワークライフバランスが取れている会社に勤めたいという声も多くてですね、やはり商品が一番のところではあるんですけれども、その次ぐらいに週休3日制というのはアピールポイントに入ってきますね。
Working 5 days a week is still the norm in Japan. Only 7.5% of companies offer a 4-day work week.
難しいと思いますと。で、それはまず企業側として越えないといけない壁があります。それは少なくとも制度導入前、週休3日制の制度導入前と同水準の生産性や、業績っていうのを維持できないと入れられないですね、制度が。で、労働者側の課題というのは、要は1日あたり労働時間が増えたりとか、1日あたりの労働時間が増えたり、給与が減ったりすることを許容できるかっていうのが問題です。
Another challenge, not every job can be done on a 4-day cycle. At Khmer, only those who work in sales can apply for a short work week. Those who work in factories cannot.
And for more, let's bring in Hiroshi Ono, Professor of Human Resource Management at Hitotsubashi University Business School. Well, thanks so much for joining us this evening, Professor. First up, we heard that story there. It is an anecdotal, one. But beyond a few of these progressive companies, right? I'm curious to know who is truly buying into this idea of a 4-day work week, especially when workaholism is so deeply ingrained in Japanese culture.
Well, thank you for having me. I would say that I think that it's a good initiative, and I praise the companies that are starting to do this. But it is still a relatively early stage. I think that in terms of the public sector, the biggest, the big news, of course, is that Tokyo metropolitan government will install the 4-day work week starting in April. So we'll see how that goes. But as the video was showing, there are some hurdles along the way for this to be working effectively.
Right. And I just want to bring in Panasonic because very interestingly, they were ahead of the curve because they rolled out this 4-day work week option for employees back in 2022. And according to the numbers, only about 150 of 63,000 eligible workers actually opted in.
Right.
I mean, they were given this good option, as you mentioned. So why so few?
Well, there are several bottlenecks along the way. For example, we have a hard work ethic, which is a good, it's a good thing, of course, but the downside of that is that some individuals might feel like they're being evaluated on their efforts, and also on their, like how hard they're working, right? So I call this the input-driven culture. And also, there might still be some companies that do evaluate people on their effort. And so this could be, it could be like a work culture issue that could become one impediment. The other issue could be that we are still a collectivist culture, right? So, and everybody works in teams. So you need very good understanding from your team to be able to do this. So, if you're like working in a team of 5 people and one person is missing 1 day a week, well, that's obviously going to affect the dynamic of that team. So you really need some really good communication. And in collectivist culture, some people might opt out saying that, well, I don't want to be a trouble to other people. I don't want to disrupt the harmony of the workplace. And these issues could be getting in the way. So it's a little bit different from implementation in Western cultures, which tend to be a little bit more individualistic.
Now, I'm just curious to know as well about the generational tensions playing a role, in how this policy is being perceived, because there is the impression that younger workers, they are more open to the 4-day work week. Older employees, though, I mean, and in Japan especially, they tend to hold decision-making power. They may resist that change. So do you see perhaps younger workers ultimately trying to drive this shift?
Well, that's a great question. There is certainly a generational divide here. The Gen Z people certainly prioritize work-life balance significantly more than the older generations. And in terms of flexibility, we can also talk about remote work, right? So the 4-day work week is flexibility in terms of time. The remote work is flexibility in terms of location. And the younger generations certainly are demanding this from their workplace. And there have been many studies that have been conducted which show that the younger generation would be willing to give up their compensation, maybe like 10, 20% of their pay, in order to have this option, right, to be more flexible at work. So there's a very clear generational divide. And hopefully that, we will reach a critical mass at some point where this becomes the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah, so when is that going to take? I mean, when is a realistic trajectory for Japan where there is this shift in the culture mindset? You know, we talked about this potential tipping point that could actually push widespread acceptance faster than expected. And what would it take?
Well, that is a pretty difficult issue. You have to understand also that, you know, the 4-day work week is really an exception around the world, right? So it's not just in Japan. I mean, I've talked to people in Sweden, which has a very, very flexible, you know, work culture, and it's still very much the exception in Sweden and other Nordic countries as well. Japan, especially because we're not a very flexible people. Like there's lots of rules in place and etc. So I really don't expect this to take off anytime soon. But I think one impetus will be that Tokyo metropolitan government becoming, you know, being the biggest public sector employer in Japan among the prefectures. I think that that's going to be one impetus for change, and I'm hoping that it would, you know, go well.
Sure. And if also, before I let you go, I just want to know from an HR point of view, you know, how Japan has long equated long hours with dedication rather than actual productivity. And what sort of changes do you think need to happen to be able to measure performance beyond just time, you know, spent physically in the office?
See, well, as you said, you know, we still do have, there's still like a remnants of the old work style where people are evaluated on their effort. But I think we need to set the some, you know, parameters. We need to change the compensation scheme to some extent so that people are rewarded on their productivity and on their output. I think that the current system is still like tilted towards, you know, an input-driven evaluation.
Yeah, money talks. Compensation certainly helps. Thank you so very much for this conversation you have with us, Professor Hiroshi Ono from Hitotsubashi University Business School. And of course, you can catch the full Money Mind episode to find out the different ways people are finding work-life balance around Asia. All right, it's time for a break. Another break's coming up, but coming up next, the world's richest man wants to transform internet services in Pakistan. But concerns about national security and a potential Chinese rival could stand in the way. More than 700 companies from around 120 countries are taking part in the India Energy Week. The 3-day event is focused on ramping up the global clean energy transition while ensuring affordable access to power. It comes at a time when there is some uncertainty about the push to make power more sustainable as US President Donald Trump embraces fossil fuels. Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said at the opening ceremony that his nation is committed to global sustainability, including reducing emissions and increasing the use of renewables. Mr. Modi also says that India is on track on a number of fronts, from meeting 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030 to hitting a target of producing 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen by that year. The Indian Petroleum and Natural Gas Minister also spoke at the opening ceremony, saying that the time for action is now.
Climate change is no longer a looming threat. It is already here. It is unfolding in many grave disasters. Wildfires, floods, and record-breaking temperatures are clear reminders that the world is running out of time. I am a student of history. When I look back at the evolution of global energy economics, I recognize that the very notion of energy transition requires a very deep and nuanced understanding. It is not outright replacement, but more shifting the primacy of one energy source over another. This transition isn't about eliminating hydrocarbons overnight, but leveraging them strategically while scaling renewables to mitigate emissions.
Well, the World Economic Forum says that even as the global green energy transition is slowing, India, China, and some other nations are helping to lead the way by crafting clear policies and creating investment opportunities. CNA's Roland Lim spoke to Roberto Bocca from the WEF. Now, he emphasized the need to streamline regulations to help emerging markets transit to renewable energy.
The Energy Transition Index has shown that in the last few years, actually, the energy transition is slowing. But clearly, the region that are leading is China. The region that is leading is China. But there has been fantastic progress also in India and Brazil. So we have seen a progress in many of the countries where most of the demand is growing. That is a good news.
And what lessons do you think can be learned from these countries that are leading the path forward?
So there are a commonality, and one of them is to have the enablers in place to allow investment to come in, and policy that are in place will definitely allow that. So have clear objective and clear roadmap with policy that enable investment actually to come.
There has been significant progress when it comes to renewable energy adoption, but many countries still struggle with scalability. You talk of enablers. Give us an example of how this can be adopted in developing countries that might want to scale up.
Yeah, it's very difficult to scale up at the size that we are talking about because, we have a strong energy system around the world, also in emerging markets, but this has to grow exponentially because of the more demand coming, especially in emerging economies. There is a lot of more demand coming in. So every time you put in the installation of a solar or a wind, this is just going to cover the additional demand, but it's not covering for the demand that was already there. So the challenge is double. It's not just cover the growing demand, but also covering the previous demand. What is very, very clear is that policy that enable speed in execution. In the country where we are today, in India, they have been very good in taking away administrative burden. So acceleration to get permitting to deploy this renewable. So that, if you ask me, one option is really that one. If you are able to deploy the investment much quicker.
The U.S. is pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. That's created significant ripples in global climate efforts. How do you think this decision will actually affect the momentum towards international climate action?
Look, my expertise is more energy than climate per se, but I do think that today the cost of renewable energy, for example, and batteries and others are pretty low. They're actually very competitive. So as far as there is as long as there is a competitive edge, there is a business case for the energy transition will keep going. And let's remember, the energy transition is not only sustainability, but it's also about energy security and energy affordability. So if the prices are down, more deployment will happen, and that will address the three dimensions of affordability, security, and sustainability.
Okay. You mentioned energy security. That's a critical concern for many countries, especially in the wake of geopolitical tensions that we're seeing and supply chain disruptions with the Middle East tensions and also the war in Ukraine. How can countries balance, you think, their immediate energy needs with long-term climate commitments?
It's a very good question, and each country effectively has to do it. That's why we call it energy transitions, as opposed to plural, as opposite to transition singular. And so, of course, countries have to do that. But I will tell you one thing. If you have more renewable energy deployed in your country, you are less dependent from external factors. So, arguably, also renewable energy is part of security. And so each country will find their balance, but there are a lot of opportunities because today we have more technology that are available. One country might be more nuclear, one more renewable, one a mix of different sources. But I think this is a really opportunity.
Looking forward to the next 10, 15 years, what do you think are the top three priorities that the global energy sector must focus on in order to meet climate targets?
In my view, there are one thing that is about, well, you asked for three. Let's see if I get to three. But definitely one is to create a decarbonization of the current energy system, because we have a big energy system already, and we can help in reducing emissions from this energy system. Second is focusing on efficiency. We are wasting far too much energy, so there is the reduction of energy intensity, how much energy we need to produce 1 unit of GDP, if you like, so efficiency. And the third one is, of course, the deployment of the new technology, the renewable energy, but also the system integrated technology that allow really the best use of renewable energy.
Pakistan has one of the slowest internet speeds in the world, but Elon Musk is hoping to change that with his Starlink satellite internet service. The SpaceX-owned telco is awaiting government approval to operate in Pakistan. But national security concerns, controversial comments from Mr. Musk, and a potential Chinese rival are complicating things. Hira Mustafa reports from Islamabad.
Mohammad Asghar is a 50-year-old food delivery worker in Islamabad. The sole breadwinner in a family of 4, Asghar says Pakistan's repeated internet disruptions have hit him hard.
70% उसमें हम लोग लॉस में गए हैं. बिल्कुल ही नेट नहीं है तो आप काम नहीं कर सकते.
He relies on his phone to receive orders from restaurants. When there is no internet, orders are missed.
थोड़ा सा भी कोई मसला हो गया तो वो मना कर देता है कि यार ये एसएम शिपमेंट वापस नहीं लेंगे. तो उस सूरत में सम टाइम हमारे साथ ये ज्यादती हो जाती है एज कंपनी की तरफ से कि वो राइड जो है वो राइडर के ऊपर पड़ जाती है.
Pakistan's mobile and broadband internet speeds are among the world's lowest 10%, according to web testing and diagnostics company Ookla. IT experts blame aging infrastructure and power cuts for the problem. Enter Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet service. It's awaiting the government's green light to launch in the country. Starlink promises faster speeds and improved reliability, even in remote locations for millions of people here.
It will impact is, of course, better connectivity. It is going to be something which is going to be in sync with Pakistan's digital Silk Route and also getting the e-commerce up and going. It will better connect Pakistani market with the US market.
But there's the issue of cost. Starlink can be expensive, going by global rates. A one-time hardware setup fee of nearly $400 and a monthly subscription rate of $126 is steep in a country where the average monthly income is under $300. It helps that Starlink isn't the only satellite internet service provider eyeing this market. Other companies awaiting approval include China's Shanghai Spacecom, potentially giving options to Pakistanis.
The more companies you have offering services, the better it is for the country because you have more choice, you have more variety, and when they're competing, they'll try to decrease their prices to capture more of the market chunk.
But Pakistan's internet woes isn't just because of slow internet speeds. Government blockades are a contributing factor, according to VPN reviewer Top10VPN.com. It identified 18 instances of deliberate internet shutdowns last year, citing elections, information control, and protests. The disruptions cost the economy an estimated $1.62 billion last year, more than civil war-torn Sudan and Myanmar.
Could satellite internet services bypass blockades? Probably, but IT experts here tell CNA it's unlikely to happen if these companies want to operate in Pakistan. Starlink has come under scrutiny in neighboring India for allegedly being used in criminal activity and to sidestep India's internet shutdowns.
Also complicating matters, Elon Musk comments linking Pakistanis to Asian grooming gangs in the UK involved in sex abuse cases. This has drawn sharp criticism from lawmakers, including condemnation from the country's Foreign Office and calls for Musk to apologize. But the need for internet speed may win out yet. Pakistan said approvals for these satellite internet companies are likely to come within 6 months. Until then, the future of its internet hangs in the balance. Hira Mustafa, CNA, Islamabad.
And on this note, we wrap up East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.